This is how to build a setting framework for any offer. This is something that you can use as an agency owner, as a sales manager, to actually bag offers, because a lot of the time you'll find that, especially accounts with a weak infrastructure, they're not gonna have DM framework set up, or they have a framework set up, but they don't even know what they're doing. So you can then come onto a sales call, or when you're pitching your management services as a setter, using this information in this video, you can essentially create an entire framework infrastructure within their business. The main thing that you have to do is you have to know these certain points. So essentially it's literally just getting from point A to point B. These questions that we're going to explain are kind of like checkpoints in the middle. So something that inexperienced setters do, or even sometimes experienced setters, they like to come off the framework a lot, and the framework's there for a reason. It's been tested, and we know that you need to hit these points specifically to psychologically get someone to book a call at the end. We'll start off with the first step. So the first step is outreach. So sending out the initial DM. This could be anything from, hey, thanks for dropping me a follow. Are you here for the content, or are you looking to get in shape? If it's a fitness offer specifically. So you'd send the outreach message, sometimes known as maybe like the first DM, and that is essentially getting your foot in the door. Now, curiosity killed the cat, right? So all you're basically doing here is you're creating an element of curiosity for the person on the other end to essentially reply. And one thing to note here is once your foot's in the door, they kind of have an obligation to reply to you. Good example to use is like if you're in the shops, for example, and someone just starts speaking to you, you're not just going to ignore them unless you're a prick. You're going to carry on the conversation. The conversation's already started, you've already heard it, so you feel obligated to reply. So that's basically what we're trying to get out of that first DM, is just create that element of curiosity so that we can just get our foot in the door, and then from there we have the buy-in to continue the rest of the conversation. Now the second part is going to be the qualifier. So there's two types of qualifiers. There's intent qualifier and then there's financial qualifier. The intent qualifier is mainly used in BizOp or, you know, make money online sort of offers, where you're essentially just qualifying them for the intent of actually wanting to start that business model. The second qualifier is financial qualifier. So pretty self-explanatory. You're basically just qualifying, do they have the finances to be able to afford the program? There's kind of two approaches you can take. There's like the brash, abrasive way where you just ask them. I would only really recommend doing that in accounts that have really, really high lead flow. Or you can ask it in a little bit more of a subtle way. You can ask what they do for work, for example. Now, if they're unemployed and they're on benefits, they probably can't afford a high ticket program. But if they're a quantity surveyor, then most likely they can. So once you've got past the qualifier, usually you would never go off the framework past the qualifier, but here is where you can start to have a little bit more freedom, because you then know that you're at least not wasting your time speaking to that person. So the second part would be the current situation. So essentially that is, where are they right now? Where are they in their journey to getting in shape? Where are they in regards to starting their Airbnb business? Whatever that might be, where are they at this current moment in time? And it's good to kind of state that, because then it reinforces that they're not where they want to be. And you're basically getting them to admit that. Once you've found the current situation, you then want to move on to the future situation. Now I'm probably going to keep repeating myself and saying this over and over again, but you can come off the framework. Just don't come off it too much. You always need to make sure to come back onto the framework, because we know that psychologically, if we ask these questions, it will lead to a booking. Once we find out the current situation, we'll find out the future situation. So essentially that is, where do they want to be? So we know where they are, we know what they're doing right now, but where do they want to be? Do they want to be making 10K a month with Airbnb? Do they want to have abs and a toned physique? But essentially just finding out where they want to be in their journey. Now, what you would do is you'd essentially ask them for their plan. What is the plan to basically get from the current situation to get to the future situation? Now remember, these framework points that I'm explaining are just the ask a question part in the ACA framework. So remember, acknowledge what they say, comment on what they've said, and you ask a question. So for example, the question would be, what's their current situation? You'd never ask it like that, but that's what the overview of the question would be. And then you'd want to kind of phrase that in a slightly different way for it to make more sense. So for example, you might not say, what is your current situation? You might say, yeah, totally hear that, man. I actually speak to quite a few people that feel pretty similar. So in terms of getting in shape then, where exactly are you in your journey, right? We've not just gone, what's your current situation? You know, we've asked it within our framework, within the ACA framework. Now we found out where they want to be, we know where they are. What's the plan to get from where they are to where they want to be? And here is usually where you'll uncover enough leverage, enough pain to then pivot into the call. Because usually people don't have a plan, because if they had a plan, they'd be implementing the plan. And usually most people aren't. Once we've found the plan, we'll then pivot into the call booking. Now there may be some objections to handle. We may might come off the framework from the plan part to the pivoting, but essentially the next stage that you want to be hitting after finding out what their plan is the pivot point into the call. Now, at the start of this video, I mentioned that you can utilize this framework technique to make infrastructure for any business. Now, you might have noticed how the way we described the framework was very general, like what's your current situation? You can word that into an Airbnb offer, you can word that into a trading offer, you can word that into a B2C setting offer, but you're not going to say what is your current situation, but that's just the concept. So once you understand the concept, you can then bring that forward to potential clients, and you can essentially build on that basic fundamentals of the framework to create a more tailored version for a specific niche or client. So to recap, it's outreach, first DM, qualifier, current, so where are they, future, where do they want to be, plan, what's the plan to get from where they are to where they want to be, and then pivot point into booking the call. Now, this is definitely like one of the most important things to grasp, especially as a growth operator, as a sales manager, because I would say in setting itself, having a framework is genuinely essential. It's similar to having a post-booking process. You can still get results without it, which is why a lot of businesses will not even have a framework, or they might have a way too in-depth version of forcing pain points out. It's body as fuck, robotic, don't do it. So this just basically gives you an opportunity to show your authority, and potentially you can sign your next deal using this technique, because if you really grasp the concept and you watch this video say a couple times, then you can speak with complete conviction on your calls, and you can build out a setting framework for any niche, any business. Hope that was useful, guys. If you want to see more content like this, drop a subscribe, drop a like, drop a comment, and I'll see you in the next video.